So about 2 years ago I tried doing a similar video to this one, and I'm not sure why honestly. This time a new game is coming out, so I wanted to give it another shot, cause frankly that old video was shit, and I actually made the challenge harder this time, with some exceptions. I attempted to beat Marvel's Spider-Man with only the main web shooters, without web swinging, and without taking damage. With that being said, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, cause I'm sure there will be another one of these once the new game is out. Kicking off the run and ignoring the first cutscene, we get forced into a situation where you need to hold the swing button. Similarly to the way you can attempt a jumpless run in Super Mario Odyssey, in this game this text box can be completely skipped by looking around to find a nearby web zip point, web zipping, and then holding the swing button. This obviously causes you to do the zip animation while also closing the text box. In all honesty, the rest of the game is pretty straightforward. You can't swing, so web zipping around the city for the first half of the game isn't fun, so we're gonna ignore those parts from here on out and only talk about the fights. Which honestly, as it should be, the only actually hard fight is Fisk until you start getting into demon territory, because the amount of enemies with guns is pretty minimal, usually about one per group of enemies for the beginning of the game. As an example, the fight we're getting into right now, you fight like 20 people, 2 of them having guns, the rest are dodge and then punch a couple times, because they quite literally run at you instead of trying to shoot you, like a smart person. With that being said, I'm gonna skip some stuff because, again, aside from Fisk who can tank a couple hits and throw things back at you, the only other enemy that can be a little hard to fight are ones shooting rockets at you. But even then, they are far and few between, till the raft takedown, which causes them to be fucking everywhere. Moving on, because this is taking a little too long to explain, which it obviously shouldn't, we're just going to move on to the section where we help Yuri fix the police radio towers, because that causes you to fight new groups of enemies like the ones with crowbars and shields, which force you to do an uppercut to break through their guard, and then you can smack them a bit. On the other hand, you have heavies, which make you web them up or throw things at them to break their guard, and then you smack them a bit. Very similar enemies, but it comes down to the shield ones also throwing bombs at you, while the heavies cannot be hit right off the bat, so you need to break their guard while avoiding their own attacks. Lastly for this section is the Fisk construction site. This section isn't inherently hard because it's made up primarily of the same enemies that were in the Fisk raid, so it's mainly avoiding punches while occasionally having guns or rockets thrown in for funsies, which again aren't inherently hard to avoid, but when you mix all of them together on the hardest difficulty, on top of bombs being thrown out occasionally which don't give you any sort of warning till they're about to go off, especially if you're not fully paying attention or don't have the reaction times of a god. Luckily I was able to do it after a couple attempts, so let's just keep moving. This next section is a little hard to explain where the challenge actually comes in, because the last time where not being able to web swing impacted the game was right before the construction site, but it was the same situation as the first one. You just web zip and hold the swing button. Otherwise, the next situation I can think of that was actually a little difficult is the shocker fight, which to be fair was pretty similar to avoiding all the other basic enemies with him just being a little stronger. Next would be the demon truck chase, because this isn't hard at all while being able to swing, but if you mess up a web zip too many times or bash into a wall or something, you can absolutely fail that mission due to the handicap, similarly to the helicopter chase in the next mission. I was able to do both with no issue, but I can definitely see someone new to the game having trouble with this section. Finally, I feel the need to point out for people who know this game that I'm not discussing the MJ or Miles sections because they have nothing to do with this challenge. There's quite literally no reason to talk about them, so I'm just not going to. Starting off the next section is the demon section right before we meet Silver Sable. The reason this one is hard is because it's the introduction to the whip characters. The reason these guys are kinda crazy is because the only way to break their shield is by throwing stuff at them, so webs are a no-go along with attacking them in any way. Because if you don't perfectly dodge their attack or throw something at them from a distance, they just grab and slam you into the ground before you can do anything. They're obviously beatable because I did it, but they're also in all honesty the hardest enemies you'll fight in the game. Being completely honest, we're going to skip quite a bit, because the next actually kinda hard fight is the first fight against Lee. The reason this one is hard is because there's fire in frankly very small sections that should be very easy to avoid, but somehow every time you fight the first row, unless you're paying very close attention, you end up getting pushed into it regardless, along with sword enemies also being introduced in this fight. which are very similar to the whip enemies, just not quite as bad. They can't grab you or anything, but your webs and your basic attacks don't work, so you need to make sure that you're throwing something at them or disorienting them in some way before attacking them, or you're almost guaranteed to be hit. I'm aware I made this section much shorter, but there's honestly nothing to talk about, because they're all basically the same enemies aside from what I told you. So with that being said, let's move on to the raft. The raft breakout is the true turning point in this challenge. As I said previously, rocket launcher enemies become much more common, but that isn't the worst part. That comes in with Electro. There's a section where you need to chase him while avoiding his lightning that he throws at you, which let me tell you is a lot harder when you're so limited to the movements you can make, because you can't web zip off the sky like in previous games, so you need to stay close to the building while also keeping pace with him. So this is a situation like the demon truck and the shocker chase, which can very easily lead to a failed mission. Lastly is the part where you need to run up a wall while Electro throws balls of electricity towards you, which can be avoided somewhat easily but forces you to be much faster with your dodge presses. After everything at the raft is where shit hits the fan for the overworld. Raft escapees start scouring the city along with fast travel being removed, so for a certain amount of time you're forced to web zip around the city while being constantly shot at from rooftops, requiring you to keep a finger on the dodge button at all times, cause now you can't escape the fear of damage anywhere. Moving on, we're asked by Yuri to support 2 police stations which are being attacked by Rhino and Electro separately. We begin with Electro where we need to shut down some power generators, which is difficult because you need to web them up slowly while free falling in the case of one being held by a helicopter, but the others as well due to you hitting a rooftop and then shooting your webs is basically a guaranteed run killer. On the other hand, after that part is done, we have arguably the worst fight in the entire game, for this challenge. You're forced to fight a bunch of demons, which inherently wouldn't be an issue, but this time you have gun enemies, shield enemies, and sword enemies all at the same time, so you need to do this fight in a pretty specific order. Taking out the gun enemies should be your first priority because they're for sure the hardest to avoid. Then the shield enemies because once again they're the easiest to get rid of while avoiding the sword ones. When you break it down, this one isn't that bad, it's just hard to deal with in the moment if you don't know what you're doing. Lastly, for this game we have 3 more fights and one really dumb issue to talk about. The first fight is against Electro and Vulture, which is relatively easy, but also isn't because there are 2 of them. So while Electro and Vulture are both very easy to fight solo because it's just dodging attacks and webbing generators in the case of Electro, keeping your focus on one character, again, almost guarantees you taking damage from the other one. But if you keep your eyes focused on the spider sense, knowing that an attack is coming and dodging is pretty easy. This bleeds into the next fight being Rhino and Scorpion. Dodging and defeating Rhino is pretty easy, but Scorpion on the other hand is where things get rough, because he can shoot you while you're focused on Rhino, but will also try tackling you from basically anywhere. So this is another fight where you just need to keep an eye on the spider sense to count on avoiding damage. The last bit of possible damage before the auto fight is this little hole before beating Lee for the final time, which is easy, that's why I'm not going to be talking about that part. The reason this is hard is because the edges of the hole is covered in Lee's corruption. So you're almost guaranteed to take damage here, which is when I almost gave up because I didn't think you could avoid it. Then I remembered how I did it the first time. So if you jump down to this platform and aim your reticle in the middle of the hole, you have just enough space to web zip while not taking damage, saving the run. Finally ending the game is the auto fight, which honestly just isn't hard. You just need to be able to dodge correctly while using the short sections of time between attacks to web him up or throw stuff at him. Along with the sections where he sets the ground to electrocute you, you can just web zip to these poles and then throw stuff back at him. The rest of this fight is very repetitive compared to the first round, so that's where I'm gonna cut the video. I think this challenge is very fun while not being very hard, but I also think for somebody new to this game, this is also a very good challenge to get you introduced to how certain mechanics work, along with training your reaction time. If you have the game and want to replay it, but make it a little bit harder, I definitely suggest it. With that being said, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, also, I completely forgot, but this part before the construction site which forces you to use the impact web is completely avoidable if you return to the last checkpoint in the options menu. Also, there are a lot of parts that require you to use the electric webs that you are forced to do. Trust me, I tried to avoid them, so you kind of just had to deal with it. Technically, that could be a failed run, but like, I don't know. I don't really count them because they have to be used. Now the video is actually done. See you in the next one.
sunshine.